morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV 92.1. And we're very glad to have both audiences with us again here Monday at 2 o'clock. And we have what we think is a pretty good program here for the next hour. Hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. Those of you who are with WFOV, you'll be taking a break at about 26 minutes into the program, and hopefully you'll come back after that 4-minute hiatus is over and rejoin the program at the next point of our connection.
By the way, I'd like to do a point right now for a shameless self-promotion for All Points. If you get a chance, you're listening to this, and you want to follow all the shows we do, you can go to YouTube. You'll see it up there in the top there. You got the leaf that's got the leaf insignia APT. Look for that. It's All Points TV on YouTube, and subscribe to that, and you can also get notifications whenever we do new shows. We do all kinds of shows on different subjects with different hosts, so pretty much you'll never know who's on here. So anyway, Mr. Ramos here is a regular, and he's been here for 8-9 years now. So.
They haven't thrown me off here yet, John. They've thrown me off of Facebook.
Well, see,
they haven't thrown me off of allpointstv.com yet.
See, unlike the left, we don't really shy away from other views. We're aware they exist, at least. You know? The left is amazed that somebody else sees things differently than they do, and they're just like horrified that you disagree with them. So.
Yeah, John, I think we're going to have a point of disagreement here today. I'm going to be talking at the end of the program, or somewhere in between the time we start and the time that we end the program, on the deliberations and what's going on now in Israel. I don't think we're on the same page with that, John. I'm going to see how you feel about it in terms of moving the capital to Jerusalem. And since that's happening today, and they've had the ceremony this morning, I was watching before I came to the studio. I'm going to see what our differences, or maybe even maybe we have similar views on it. But I will get your input before the program is over. I wanted to talk a little bit about some other things to start off with, though. I want to talk about I just think that America, as I look at this situation more and more politically in this country, I just think that America is one of the most brainwashed countries on the planet. And I have to ask myself over and over again, how do they rule this country and make it appear that we are more free in this country than we actually are?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm just getting tired of hearing all. We're the freest country in the world. We're really not as free as these people are assuming. That's. I keep on making that point, and I get people like horrified, screaming at me that I'm like saying that this country's not free. Well, it isn't free. It is not free.
I think the American people are some of the, and I'm going to try to prove that today in terms of some of our documents. I'm going to try to prove that the American people are some of the most brainwashed people on the planet, if not the most brainwashed people on the planet. And it goes back to something that I read some years ago in a book written by Chancellor Williams, who made the point that in Russia, for example, the people know that they are not free, but in America, they don't know that. And I'm going to try to put some things in perspective today in this program that would indicate that Chancellor Williams is right, and how they are in fact getting away with it in terms of the American people being brainwashed but not even aware of the fact that they're brainwashed. You know how they say there are those who know, and those who know not, and then those who know not that they know not. And they say that the ones that know are the ones that are wise. The ones that know not are ignorant, and those who know not that they know not are fools. And I think we are in that latter category, those who know not that they know not. And I'm not criticizing the American people. I'm criticizing that which got them in the state that they're in, because it's a very sophisticated operation they have going on here. And I want to point out some of the ways in which they're doing it. Because unless you're willing to put the time into it and do the investigative work, you won't even realize that they're pulling the wool not only over your eyes, they're pulling the wool over your entire head. And let me show some examples of that. John, I've said in the past, I said that, I was saying on one of the radio shows, I was saying that there has been no civil war fought in this country. And people just go off and, Moss, you lost your mind, blah, blah, blah. And if you tell them that there's been no civil war in the country, that's one thing, and that's bad enough, right? But if you say on top of that, that the war that claims there had been a civil war, which was between 1861 and 1865, and you say that that war was not over slavery, then that's a double whammy, because they're saying you're really going off now, because they just convinced that Abraham Lincoln, who they have as the greatest president this country has produced, according to their particular theories, who was so bothered by slavery in the country that they were willing to sacrifice what amounts to about 5 million people, the equivalent of 5 million people, based upon the 720-something thousand persons that died in this war that was fought between April the 9th, 1861, with the firing of Fort Sumter, and the ending of the war on the 12th of April, 1865, when they met in the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, and Grant and the general from the Confederate States, the Confederate nation, if I might say, signed an agreement to end this war that had created all this carnage in this country. And they want to claim, as they did last night, they had it on Fox last night, this program that's called Legend and Lies. And they had this program on again, if they keep running this over and over again, this narrative, that the war that they fought was a war over slavery. So now we're fighting a war, a civil war, and apparently the idea would be then that the South is shooting at the North because the North is coming down to the South to grab the slaves off the plantation and free the slaves, and the South is shooting in order to maintain the slaves in the South so the slaves would not gain their freedom. And that's what they're fighting this war about. And people actually believe that to be true. That's nonsense. And I say that's part of the brainwashing, but it's not just, so that's not, so the first thing I want to say is that there's been no civil war in the country, and there has been no war that was fought to end slavery in the United States. In other words, that's not why the war was first of all engaged in 1861, and you can claim that during the war that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, but even that is a misunderstanding, because the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln issued, giving the South 100 days to lay down his weapons, which the preliminary emancipatory document was issued in September of 1862, and the South had 100 days to lay down their weapons. If they had done so, they could have come back into the Union with their slaves intact. But they refused to do that, and the war continued. And then after the 100 days was up, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation and made it reach into, and had it so that it reached into the southern states, that is, say, the states that had succeeded and when and no longer were part of the Union, because they set up their own government and their own nation called the Confederacy. And there's Lincoln, who is over the Union states, that's going to resolve the slavery issue in the states that had formed another country called the Confederate States of America. And so he's going to free their slaves. Meanwhile, the slaves in the Union states, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't say one thing about the ones that were slaves inside of the Union. So you have to get off that. You can get off that stuff about this war is over slavery. And last night they were saying that when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, then that meant that the South at that point was fighting over slavery at that point. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't issued until 1863. So if that would be the case, then what was the war being fought on between 1861 and up to the point of January 1st, 1863? What was being fought on before that? This is the brainwashing I'm talking about. But it doesn't start there. Let me make another point, because I am contending that this country has the most brainwashed people in it than anyone else on the planet. And I go into countries and I talk to a lot of people in these different countries. In Africa, for example, they don't have any illusions about the government in these countries. They're not really talking about the greatest leaders of, let's say, Nigeria, for example, or the greatest leaders of Gambia, or the greatest leader of Ghana. I don't hear those conversations over there.
I know European. I don't want. So I never know and talk to the European. I mean, I talk to English people, online, and they don't have any delusions about what England did throughout its history with the colonization and all that, and they're very aware of that. And some are chagrined, some are basically accept that's what it was to. That's the way the world was at that point. I kind of have a tendency to agree with that. I mean, if anybody else got the position to do that, they would have done the same thing or similar things. So, but I never seen this people like I believe I believe one time America did have a reason to boast, but we've diminished that. See, and every time you talk to academics, they always say, "Well, in Europe they do this, and Europe they do that." I don't have this delusionary version of European history they seem to possess, because I think I see Europe as a massive graveyard, because I'm aware of the wars been fought. But yet they have a tendency to think everything that comes out of Europe is better, more peaceful, more benevolent, more loving, more well thought out. And it's like I'm looking like you guys are ignoring thousands of years of history on the Europeans' behalf. And I'm saying this not as a pointing a finger. I am from European ancestry. So my family packed their crap up and got over here because they knew the situation was going to change drastically immediately there. So they got out. So, I don't understand why they kind of mythologize Europe, the academics, but we also mythologize ourselves. And the truth is somewhere in the middle somewhere. Yeah, it's like all great and glorious, and amber waves of grain and all that kind of crap. And then you have the reality. The reality. And somewhere there's a mix. And what I think is great about this country was allowing for dissent. But now the left is leading the charge to prevent anybody who's got an alternate viewpoint from being heard. That's what I find appalling, that these people advocated for free speech in the 60s and are so adamant to shut down anybody who can challenge their narrative.
Yeah, what makes this country exceptional is not the politics that was set up in the aftermath of the theoreticals that were the basis of the country's founding. We have the greatest documents that's ever been produced as to why we are forming another, country. We have some great founding documents, and that's why I want to start off in terms of this brainwashing and try to connect up how this brainwashing is so embedded in the fabric of the country through certain creative beliefs that we have about the nation. So I've said, let me just go back over what I've said already, and I want to make an additional point here. I've said that there has been no civil war fought in this country, because a civil war is not two nations fighting each other. A civil war is where you have factions inside the same country fighting for the hegemony or the political control of the same territorial space. And you ask yourself this question: is that what they're doing in those 11 states that succeeded? 7 states at the outset of this war between 1861 and 1865. Is that what they're doing here? That those 7 states that initially succeeded from the United States, are they fighting in order to gain control of the center of power that was located in Washington, D.C.? If so, then why have they succeeded from the Union then? If this is a civil war, then why is there a secession from the Union? These are two nations fighting each other. This is not a civil war. And if the war in 1776 is not a civil war, although the people were primarily from England and some other parts of Europe, but they were speaking English and they were fighting against the British king. No one calls that war a civil war. They call it a war for independence. So then if that's a war of independence, the question is very simple. Then why is the War of 1861 a civil war if the war at the beginning of the nation's history is a war for independence? And how is this war then a war that is a civil war? It is not a civil war. It is a war for independence where the South has succeeded from the other Union states. And when Lincoln claims that they are that he's trying to keep the Union together, the Union was together, the 22 states in the Union. There were 11 states that had left the Union and were forming another country. This is not a dissolution of the Union. This was a reclaiming of the sovereignty of 11 states. That's not what I want to go with this. I mean, that's just evident. I want to go somewhere else with this discussion, because I'm going to also say not only is there has there been no civil war in this country and no war fought over slavery, I'm also going to contend here and prove this based upon the founding documents that there is no such thing in this country as a Bill of Rights. Now just hold on for a minute, because these are some things that are very dangerous that we are in fact contending in this country. But it's not. But it's very purposeful. There's no Bill of Rights in this country, and there's no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Just wait a minute. Let me read something to you. Let me read first of all. I think I'll start with the. Let me start with the Declaration of Independence, the second paragraph. Let me read you what Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, what rights are we talking about? Rights that are inalienable rights. And what are inalienable rights? Rights you're born with. That to secure these rights, the rights you're born with, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Those governments deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And why would those that are governed have to give their consent? Because the rights that they have are inalienable rights. And in order to secure those rights, they then will institute government so as to secure the rights that they're born with. That's why it says deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. If you don't derive your just powers, if you don't derive your powers from the consent of the governed, then the powers are not just powers, they are illegitimate powers. Because in order for the government to be set up, the people must in fact subsume certain rights that they are born with to the government, so they get something out of the deal by the government. Therefore, to secure their rights, they give up some of their liberty so as to have the government able to justly secure their liberty. Otherwise, government does not have any just reason for existing. Now, I want to connect this to, I'm going to connect a couple of dots here, because I want to prove to you that there is no Bill of Rights in this country. And why the Bill of Rights is a abdication of what they're saying in the Declaration of Independence. Let me read this in terms of the Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution. And I'll just read one part of that. we the people of the United States I'm going to get down to this part here where it says, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings. They got the word blessings capitalized. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain, establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And how does that tie into what they said here in the Declaration of Independence? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights you're born with, that among these unalienable rights are life. You have the right to your life when you are born. You have the right to your own life. You have the right to your own liberty. And you have the right to the pursuit of happiness. And you're born with these rights. So what's wrong with this notion then of the Bill of Rights? Give me a break. The Bill of Rights. What is that? What's the difference in saying the Bill of Rights and inalienable rights? What's the difference? There is a difference here, isn't it? Here's Jefferson saying in 1776 that rights are inalienable. And then you have people saying that we have in the Constitution a Bill of Rights. Yeah, Jefferson was saying rights are inalienable rights. So what would they be saying when they pass these laws? They're saying that there is a Bill of Rights. They're saying here that your rights come from the government. There's no Bill of Rights. Go ahead and read it. The amendments to the Constitution. Let's go back and look at that for a minute. Because I want to show you how brainwashed you are. This country is brainwashed. And there's nobody more brainwashed, and you're not going to like me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's true as well. And you see this with Kanye West and Candace Owens, who's telling the black community the truth, and they can't hear the truth. So it brings up another additional point. There's no people on the planet more brainwashed than the American people, and there's no community in this country more brainwashed than the black community, who are unable to hear people telling them the truth. And now we got Kanye West out there and Candace Owens. They're out there as pariahs in the black community because they can't hear what Candace Owens is saying and what Kanye West is saying. And they're not, the black community is not prone to information and evidence. As can be seen by the fact that they have the lowest unemployment rate in the black community that they've had in the history of blacks in this country post 1865. Now, in the previous time period, from 1619 to 1865, yeah, black people were fully employed. The problem is they weren't getting paid. They weren't getting paid. If people weren't getting a check and they were willing to work for free, I can guarantee you right now, there would be no unemployment. Donald Trump has conditioned the black community. And I'm not here beating drums for Donald Trump. I'm just simply talking about this brainwashing. Black people have the lowest unemployment rate they've had since they've been in this country in the post-1865 period. You can put that in front of black people all day long, and they're going to still vote Democrat. because they're not prone to information. The Democratic Party has brainwashed black people to believe without any evidence that the other party is a party of the Klan. Now, I heard some people say when they showed this movie on Selma, I was down there, I was over there at the theater in one of the movie theaters. They were, okay, that's take a break for the next 4 minutes from WFOV, and they'll be back in 4 minutes, hopefully, to join the discussion again. We will continue with the discussion here at allpointstv.com, and I'm going to continue my rant. We don't get our rights from the government is what I'm saying here. And this idea that there is a Bill of Rights, if you have an understanding of it, is an abrogation of what was founded in the two parts of these critical documents.
You know, I never dawned on me. The Bill of Rights, basically you hear the word bill currently, like Bill of Attainder, means something that's expected from you. That's what it means. So basically they're saying a Bill of Rights. So basically, is that saying if we allow you these, you have to pay us that? Is that what it means? That point never dawned on me.
Yeah, let me tell you what, that you're making a point here. You see, if you say there is a Bill of Rights, what you've done here, and I'm going to show you a couple of times where it happens in more modern times as well. What has happened here is that they've taken the rights that are inalienable, that is in the Declaration of Independence, meaning that our rights come from God. They are inalienable. They are rights you're born with. Jefferson says they are rights that are endowed to you by the Creator. I'll read it again. Don't have to make it up. It's in the document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator. Does it say government here? That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are rights you're born with. And you set government up, according to the document, to secure these rights and make sure these rights that you're born with are not abrogated by anyone that's big enough and bold enough and powerful enough to negate those rights that you have because of your right to your life, therefore the right to your liberty, and the right, it used to have in it, the right to property. But they put in there the pursuit of happiness. But that's the pursuit of property and the right to property. If you put that in there, then you got to then do a whole lot of things here. You've got to rescind the 16th Amendment and stop stealing people's money. The state has to get out of that, and so on and so forth. But if I'm right, John, if I'm right, and I am right here, if I'm right in saying that there is no Bill of Rights, then what are those 10 amendments? Let me tell you what they are. They are, if you want to use the word bill, they make up a bill of restraints. Government doesn't give any rights. Our rights don't come from the government. Our rights are inalienable. But the idea is these benevolent politicians, the benevolent government, is in fact bestowing rights upon, give me a break. The government is bestowing rights upon its citizens. Government doesn't bestow rights upon anybody. Government takes rights. Because all governments, and I've been around the world, all governments do that. Because all governments are made up of people that are statists. We need to stop talking about Democrats and Republicans. There are no Democrats in the Democratic Party. And there are no Republicans in the Republican Party. You can get off that right now. They don't exist. There are no Democrats in the Democratic Party. And there are no Republicans in the Republican Party because those words mean something.
Welcome back, people from WFOV, by the way, listeners from WFOV.
Yeah, we have a real critical problem here because the government, that's how they use Abraham Lincoln's image. Abraham Lincoln was the great emancipator. and the Emancipation Proclamation, people get mad when you say it. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave in this country. And if it did, when? It was issued in 1863, January the 1st, 1863. How many slaves walked off those plantations because Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863? Okay, that's give me that music. What's that music? That Jeopardy. You know, give me that music there. Okay, the time's up. Time's up. How many slaves were freed because of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, freeing the slaves in 1863? How many slaves were freed? 0.
Yeah, I mean, how would they know? That was, I mean, it was issued to government building places, and was it sent to the South? You know, even when I was a kid, when I was younger, I actually was reading that, and it was like where it was issued. I went, I asked somebody, I said, well, how would they know? They didn't have TV or radio. Right. They didn't have like shortwave. They could be listening to like broadcast free, U.S. free or something like that. You know, I was like, well, how would these slaves know that they were free? It was kind of like it was a superficial act, to issue this proclamation to people who obviously weren't informed, of it, So.
Yeah, what did they do? Go down there on each of the plantations, because they didn't have, internet now. Those phones you got in your pocket, you got to turn off when you go to the movies because the phones go off. Well, there was none of that. Graham Bell wasn't until 1876. The war was over by that time. So you didn't have the telephones, and the word of mouth couldn't have reached all the plantations.
They did have telegraph but again, it was just, let's face it, the first thing that people did when there was a war and you had a line running from you to back and forth, they probably cut those because they didn't want to get information coming from either side. Yeah. So they probably severed the telegraph lines, so that wasn't available to them.
It wasn't available because they would not have been able to use it. We're talking about persons that were not taught to read and write. And who's going to read the proclamation to them and tell them they're free? And they make all these kind of claims, the Juneteenth things that they do and all of that. I understand that. That's part of confusion also, where they say they went into Galveston, Texas, and they were not aware of the Emancipation Proclamation that had been issued 2 years earlier, and it wasn't until June the 19th, 1865, which would have been, how many months? Let's count them. The Emancipation Proclamation would have been January 1, 1863, and then you have June the 19th, 1865, so that'd be 63, 64, and 65, and then I heard of it in Galveston, Texas, so they call that Juneteenth because that's when the last ones would have gotten in touch with the issuance of this document. Okay, fine. What does it have to do with the slaves in Maryland, in Delaware, in Kentucky, and in Missouri, which happens to be the Union states? And I heard them say last night on this program, Legends and Lies, which it should be called Legends and More Lies. I mean, legends and more lies piled on top of the lies they claim that they're correcting. Because it said that the war as of 1863 then changed the character of the war, and now the South is fighting to maintain slavery, which is nonsense, because if they're fighting 2 years before that, the question then, the question would be, then what were they fighting for 2 years hence before the document was in fact drawn up and issued by the great emancipator? What were they fighting for before that? It's nonsense. Then, in other words, they're fighting 2 years, taking their logic, fighting 2 years, and Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and because they don't lay down their weapons, because they've been fighting for 2 years, but because they don't lay down their weapons after the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, now they're fighting to keep their slaves. Does that make any sense? That's what they're trying to teach that's what they're trying to teach in this program, talk about legend and lies. They're maintaining the same lies and trying to, and here's this propaganda machine on Fox trying to act as if they're correcting the lies that's already out there, and all they're doing is adding to the lies. These are more lies being told. Lincoln was not a great emancipator, and you can go read Lincoln's own words about that. You can read Lincoln's own words about that. Read Lincoln's first inaugural address, March the 4th, 1861. Go read Lincoln's words, where Lincoln says that he has no constitutional authority to free the slaves where slavery already exists. But then he says something that's even more critically important, that he has no inclination to do so. It's one thing to say that you are bound to follow the Constitution, which Lincoln did not follow, by the way, because if he had followed the Constitution, he would have followed the Constitution as it relates to the enumeration of powers in Article 1, Section 8. And he violated that big time. Lincoln was one of the greatest violators. In fact, Lincoln is the greatest violator of the Constitution in the history of this country. And do I admire Lincoln? I don't admire Lincoln. I think Lincoln should have been tried. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Lincoln should have been brought up on war crimes. Slavery was going out. Whether you fight a war with slavery or not, slavery was going out. And the myth is that it took an outsider, some outside agent, to free blacks. Every time blacks were freed, it was always somebody on the outside bringing that result about. For example, there's this myth of the Underground Railroad. That's another myth. Go read. See, I don't have time to be talking to numbskulls. There was no Underground Railroad. Shut up. Go read Larry Garrow's book called The Liberty Line. And just read the first chapter of his book. And then tell me what you mean when you say there was an Underground Railroad. I know you're not talking about like a railroad station. You're talking about there was an underground network that the slaves used on their way from running from the Deep South. They really weren't escaping too much from the Deep South. Maryland, yes, because Maryland would be right, as a slave state, would be next to some of the states that didn't have slaves. So from states that were like on the borders between the slave states and the non-slave states, yeah, you would have a chance to gain freedom. But when you talk about an Underground Railroad causing that, show me where that's true. When I was researching this issue, I could never get past Harriet Tubman. I kept asking myself, they're saying the Underground Railroad, and when I try to discover who's involved in it, I couldn't get past the great Harriet Tubman to find anyone that was going into the South and liberating slaves. And that was about 300 slaves in her case. And that wasn't Underground Railroad, that was Harriet Tubman. So how did the rest of them, like for example, Josiah Henson, you probably know him as Uncle Tom, right? The prototype for Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote the book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And and that's been flipped. Because Uncle Tom was a heroic figure in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book. Go read the book, go read the novel. That came out in 1852. Go read Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel. That's the only novel I think it's the only novel. No, it's not the only novel I read. I was getting ready to say it was the only novel I read. But that's not true. I read another novel I thought was really great. A novel written by Daniel Painter called Old Prophet Nat. That's a great book, a great novel. And let's see, any other novels? I don't like to read novels. Because I'm too much into, I like factual information. And I know novels are kind of based on some factual, reference, but give me the real thing. I don't have time to read a lot of fiction. I do that's in the household though, because my partner in crime reads a lot of novels. She loves romantic novels, but I don't have time for novels. I like to read the historical record. And when they say there was an underground railroad, and so what does that mean? They're trying to convince people that slaves, when they escaped, they went from this house on the way to the north, and they arrived at this place over here, and they ran over there, and eventually they went wiggle around from one place to another, and arrived in the northern states. And when they passed the Compromise of 1850, which would have said that any slave caught in the northern states would have to be returned to their slave masters, then the slaves then ran to Canada. Well, I want you to do this, if you think that's true. Show me how Douglas got off the plantation. Show me what the railroad was used by Harriet Tubman, who they say was the conductor on the Underground Railroad. There was no Underground Railroad. The slaves took their legs, took their arms, both of them, their head, and the rest of their body, and they ran off with them. That's how they got freed. And when the war starts, April the 9th, at the firing of Fort Sumter, at that point, slavery was over in this country. When that first shot was fired at Fort Sumter, slavery was over in this country. It doesn't mean that everybody put down their rakes. It meant that the resistance of slavery intensified. That is to say, the mass where there was resistance to slavery was one in which the unmasking of those slaves would have occurred at that point. In fact, that is a little bit of what is being talked about in this poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, who wrote that poem in 1896 called We Wear the Mask. You remember that poem. Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote the poem called We Wear the Mask. Looking back at what had happened during slavery, he said, we wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouthed with myriad psalters. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We laugh, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise while we wear the mask. And the masking that those slaves had came down in 1861 at the firing of Fort Sumter. And those blacks started packing up and leaving. And when they had that, when they had those bells, they had those little bells that they would ring, meaning that they wanted some more tea. One joke says that blacks were from the Motisa tribe. More tea, sir, more coffee. So the Motisa tribe. They started ringing those bells for the servants to come in and give them more tea. And those blacks were telling those slave owners bells and played out. There was unmasking that was going on. And when those soldiers showed up, no matter what Lincoln said, those blacks went to meet those soldiers. And anyone that doubts that, go and read the record for yourself and see that when the reason why they had this idea of 40 acres and a mule was because those blacks were leaving the plantations in such numbers, they were feeding on the rations of the soldiers and weakening the war effort. And so therefore, the soldiers in the field issued Special Order 15 to give the blacks some land so they would stay there, because those blacks are walking off in droves. And Lincoln had said anything about the Emancipation Proclamation at that point. Slavery was over in this country. And the Emancipation Proclamation making ending slavery in this country is nonsense. Black people took their arms, their legs, and others and freed themselves in this country. You can take that and let it alone. That, in other words, this whole thing, this whole scheme that's set up is based upon misinformation. The Bill of Rights, I was saying that earlier, the Bill of Rights. There's no Bill of Rights in this country. Government does not give anybody any rights. How you have a Bill of Rights and Jefferson is telling the American people they're born with rights? Government does not bestow rights. Government takes rights. All governments do that. And it's amazing to me that the American people cannot see that they have invested all of their liberties in the benevolence of this government. And they use Abraham Lincoln's image as a way of bringing people to that conclusion. The great emancipator, the great presidents, as if politicians are great. There are no great presidents in this country except one. And the reason why, and that person, by the way, is George Washington, and the reason that George Washington is great is because he was in a position to do something great, and no one else is ever going to be in that position to do that again. And that was to disavow a status, S-T-A-T-I-S-T, a status interest in power. And that was great.
Did it ever dawn on you, and it did with me, is like when I was a kid, I saw as Gerald Ford was president, and they put, hail to the chief as he came down this staircase, by the from an airplane, and they had this podium set up, and all these guards were sitting there, and I just started, and this is right after the Vietnam era. Why do we allow these people power over our existence enough to send our kids, ourselves, to battles in other parts of the world, and we obligingly go, we're facing death at a whim of these people making a decision what a policy should be. We submit ourselves to this. To me, as a form, it's like, isn't it kind of creating a god of a sort? How is this not how is this not reprehensible? Yeah, and I just started seeing this, like, this is BS. We put ourselves in planes so we can go to other places of the world at the behest of these people. We sit there and tremble them because we invest them with power. Now we can't challenge that power.
Let me read something to you, John. You made a point here. I'm going to read something to you from a book here called The Liberal Mind. The subheading of it is The Psychological Causes of Political Madness. Let me read this to you on page 73 of this book. It's not here. I'm going to be very embarrassed. But guess what? It's going to be on here.
I was surprised that you had to get the Constitution, the Bill of Rights out and actually read it, because you got that memorized.
You know what? Why I did that? I didn't want them to think that I was, making it up. I wanted to let them see me on the set here, reading from the document. Here's what it says on page 73. See if you see this going on right now. And John, we'll come to that question and after I read this. It's chapter 10 of this book called The Liberal Mind by Dr. Rossiter, La Rossiter. The signs of decline. That's the decline of a country. And this is written by Will Durant. You probably remember him. They wrote these 11 volumes on the story of civilization.
I only got 4 of them at home, but they're amazing books.
They're amazing books. Yeah. He started on that book. He thought about it in 1912, but he didn't actually get started until 1927.
The way we want to be really inclusive here is Will and Ariel Durant. His wife was his collaborator.
There you go.
Then they were like, you ever seen a picture? Those two actually were together so long and they look like each other. I mean, I'm serious. And,
Yeah.
But they're such collaborators.
Yeah, Ariel Durant, Ariel. It says here in the Signs of Decline, chapter 10 of this book, called The Liberal Mind. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within. The essential causes of Rome's decline lay in her people, her morals, her class struggle, her failing trade, her bureaucratic despotism, her stifling taxes, her consuming wars, WARS. You see those signs of decline?
I think a bell rang on each one of them points. I mean,
Yeah, on each one, right? So when you get to the point of how do we come to this, is because what the state does, and it did it here as well, is that it takes the idea of the religion of a higher being, and it, in a very subtle way, substitute it for a belief in the state as a religion. So people end up worshiping the state. See if you see any of that going on.
I think that's what Richard John, who I was pointing out in the Macon Public Square. I think I gave you a copy of that book, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And that's what he kind of, his whole book, the thrust of that whole book is they want to strip the religion and then actually make the God, the government in a form to a God.
The religion right now is the religion of the state. And you see it in terms of the original Pledge of Allegiance. The Pledge of Allegiance didn't have it in the beginning. It had I pledge allegiance to the Republic. Now you have this I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the Republic for which it stands. You're saying one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. It now has, and why do you think it has this additional part in it today? One nation, indivisible. Why you have that in there, indivisible? Because during the Civil War, the so-called Civil War, because this is not a civil war we fought between 1861 and 1865. During that time, you saw, for example, where the greatest general this country has produced, Robert E. Lee, not Ulysses S. Grant. Robert E. Lee had limited resources, limited manpower, and it wasn't until Tecumseh, Sherman, and others set out to create total war. This is the first time we've had total war fought anywhere in the world. It was fought here first, where they began to declare war upon the civilian population. That happened in America first, nowhere else. Where the Union realized they could not defeat the South because they were losing these battles, and the only way to make the South heal was to take the war to the civilian population. And they did that. They declared war upon the civilians in this country. And that's why Lincoln should have been tried for war crimes. You got this man up there as the greatest president this country's produced. You got to be kidding me. This is the brainwashing I'm talking about. Or a Bill of Rights, as if the government gives us our rights. You got to be kidding. If the government gives rights, if it actually can give rights, then we're all in trouble, because what government gives, then government can take it away. Government doesn't give anybody rights. Government is a threat to the rights of this country. let me go back to this book here and read page 71. Let me read something to you here, because first of all, in the back of the book it says this: Are liberals out of their minds? The answer is, yeah, the liberals out of their minds, but so is everybody else. This country's out of its mind. The people of this country have been driven out of their minds. On page 71, let me read something from this book that is key to this discussion. Effects of the liberal agenda. And we're running out of time here. All forms of the liberal agenda interfere with the rational relationship between human action and the condition of life by disconnecting outcomes from adaptive behavior. In other words, what the liberal agenda does is that it interferes with the rational relationship between human action and the condition of life by disconnecting outcomes from adaptive behavior. When you put the welfare state in place, for example, you substitute productive behavior, the rationality between productive behavior and an outcome based upon that production, and you interfere with that by putting something in place that is divorced and disconnected from the rational behavior. They get a check anyway, and we'll start with that next week. But I want you to get out of this discussion today that our rights do not come from government, and there is no Bill of Rights in this country. There's a Bill of Restraints. The Constitution restrains government. It does not give anybody rights in this country. Your rights you're born with, and we have to keep government in control to maintain those rights. Okay. I got to get out of here. Want you to always follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.